Welcome, everyone. I'm Kyle, Head of Education here at Common Room, and we've got a very special stream in store for you today. But before we begin, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for being here, to everyone behind the scenes who made this possible, to our amazing guests, SJ and Chris from HubSpot, and to our very own Uncommon Community Advocacy Board member, Scott Baldwin, who produced the intro music for this stream. Okay, now let's get into it. Today, we're going to listen in on a conversation I recently had with SJ and Chris from HubSpot, who are developer community and DevRel managers. In this conversation, they share their experiences in DevRel best practices, as well as talk a little bit about how HubSpot uses Common Room to power their developer community. After the conversation, we'll dive into a brief demo of our segments feature and our latest release for segments, member management, which SJ and Chris are actually beta testing right now. Lastly, we'll wrap up the stream with a live Q&A with SJ, Chris, and I. So please be sure to put all your questions in the chat. My colleague Jacqueline will be there to collect them and share them with us so we can answer as many as possible. Again, thank you all for being here, and a huge thank you to SJ and Chris for sharing their time and insights. But now, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. Welcome, folks. Today we're talking with SJ and Chris from HubSpot, and we're going to do a deep dive on community and developer relations. First, though, I want to introduce you to both of them. Why don't we start with you, SJ?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kyle. Hi, my name is SJ Morris. My pronouns are she and her. I am the senior manager of community over on our developer relations side at HubSpot. With a 30-second overview of my career, I've been doing DevRel for about 11 years now. Wait a minute, it's 2023. So wait, 12 years. And I've been in the online community space since 2004. I don't want to count how many years that is. It's too many years. I've worked at companies like Intel, Shopify, MailChimp, HubSpot, then HubSpot again. I worked at HubSpot for a while, left and worked for MailChimp for a while, and then came back because I love HubSpot so much. And I'm really focused on finding ways to have our developers connect with each other. That's really kind of the bread and butter of what I do. That takes a lot of shapes and forms, but at the end of the day, I really want our developers to build relationships with each other.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Chris, love to hear a little bit more about you and your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having us, by the way. My name is Chris Riley. My pronouns are he, him, and kind of like SJ, so I've been in the DevRel, before it was called DevRel, world for about 15 years now, but largely doing the job even before then, and that was kind of the evolution of DevRel, actually, where essentially you had marketing, product sales, even engineering that all only got to a point when it came to developer audiences, and this role came out of necessity. And there's a whole history there, if you're ever interested in hearing that, with Guy Kawasaki and Sequoia and so forth. So I've kind of always been in this function. And what drew me to it is, yeah, I was a developer for quite a while. I enjoyed it. But I noticed I had an aptitude for communicating and educating, and that's what I was really drawn to. And I got to test that out before there was this advocacy role in sales and marketing and product. And then suddenly the dream role showed up, and I've been doing it ever since.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for joining us here. Honestly, I can't wait for this conversation. I know I had a little preview with Chris the other day. I know there's a lot that both of y'all can talk about, so I'm excited to see the energy here. Starting with my first question here, though, as far as roles, they're relatively similar sounding, but I would estimate they're pretty unique. SJ, can you tell me a little bit more about how your role may differ from Chris, and then Chris, the same?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a couple steps back and talk about how the sort of concept of DevRel is, I guess, kind of a confusing term depending on which company you're looking at, and it's still it's forming. But it's still a relatively new kind of discipline. My boss actually likens it to product management 10 years ago, talking about how there was a time when product management wasn't necessarily well understood by a company, and now it's an absolute sort of necessity for a company to be able to roll out what they need for their customers. And I think similar things are happening with DevRel today. And we're starting to see it really broken up into areas of specialty. At HubSpot, we have 4 pillars of DevRel that we call it. One is advocacy, and Chris can talk a lot about that. For myself, it's community, and we also have a lead of programs, so that's events and any opportunities to connect our developers in sort of like specific moments and activations. And then we have quality as well. So guiding our qualities to that, our developers to that quality and success that we look for our customers at HubSpot. Community, to me, I sort of mentioned in my intro, it's really that, creating the spaces, mechanisms, and ease really for developers to connect with each other, grow their networks, and become successful through, the relationships they build in the HubSpot community. To me, that's a little different than advocacy, but advocacy plays a really crucial role in that. So that's my little segue to Chris. I think Chris can talk about how the advocates play a role in community and more.
Yeah, I kind of as Shay said, I think one of the things that has been really confusing, and I'll just straight out go out and say it, is if you're using DevRel as synonymous with any specific function, you got it wrong. Even the history of DevRel didn't come from there. It really is a multidisciplinary strategy. So I look at DevRel as a strategy first, potentially a department in an organization with functions within inside of it. I probably would go out on a limb and saying advocacy was probably, or tech evangelism as it was originally called, was probably the original DevRel-ish type function. The problem back then was they expected you to do everything and be good at everything, be good at community, be good at engaging and speaking. So one big reason this happens is just time and resources. Like if you want to do a really good job at managing a community, you have to focus on that. Like it needs to be a primary focus. But also what SJ does is bringing the systems and the strategies for getting peers to connect with each other and share. That is not my forte. I think what you'll find from advocacy is that it's much more push, where we're putting content out there, point of views out there, and then responding with engagement and building relationships. I really look at it as the advocates are meant to be the representation, both externally and internally, of your developer audience. So they're meant to be you. They're meant to understand you, understand the nuance, understand the pain points, be very genuine, but have the power of the company behind them as well to kind of support, what the developer audience wants the most. Because keep in mind, advocacy very often has this internal element where you communicate with engineering to share the point of view of this external audience so that it's considered and a part of everything that we do.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So listening to both of you, it sounds like obviously there's very clear differences in what you're doing, but I am curious, like, what is the magic then between Chris and SJ? Like, what brings you together? What initiatives you work on? Yeah.
SJ and I, we tend to think in very similar ways. So we're able to connect just on that element, which is super fun because we also interpret things in similar ways. Why did we get along, SJ?
I think one of the things that was really cool, like Chris and I started working together in February. And right off the bat, it was very clear that we had an extremely similar sort of worldview and philosophy on DevRel. And, it's funny, we have a couple of points where that may not always be true, but I think but generally speaking, for all topics, we end up being on the same page. And I think it's because there's something just generally really appealing about developer relations throughout all of the sort of pillars and specialties and disciplines. At the end of the day, it's this really unique role because we're not exclusively trying to, get benefit for the company. We're truly trying to advocate for an external audience and make their lives better. And that doesn't always mean, selling HubSpot. That might mean helping them with like a general tech issue that they're struggling with, a JavaScript issue, just, any kind of generic thing. It's that giving back to the overall developer community and individual developers that both Chris, myself, our advocates, our programs lead, our quality lead, we're all really, really passionate about that. And I think that helps us go to bat internally at the company, and that helps guide our discussions. And so to me, I don't know, to me, that's the secret sauce at the end of the day. And that's why I love DevRel.
Sweet. So I'm curious, you mentioned at the beginning of your statement, SJ, that there's a few things you may not maybe see eye to eye on. If you're comfortable sharing, I'm actually
Sure.
curious, like what is something that you don't necessarily agree on?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's anything that dramatic in practice. It's really about measurement.
Hmm.
To me, DevRel, historically in my experience, has been considered is not shouldn't be considered a revenue generating or a revenue even directly touching organization within a company. The areas of focus should be things like, potentially customer lifetime, reduction of churn for customers through things like apps, through things like integrations. It's a lot more sort of not as directly connected to the bottom line. And there needs to be that trust at the executive level that DevRel is kind of this sort of glue in the wheel of the ecosystem. There's no glue in a wheel, but you know the analogies that I'm going for.
Hmm.
In the ecosystem, like they're really like making sure that the ecosystem is building value for customers through supporting and advocating for the external developer audience. I think Chris believes that there's actually really direct ways you can measure that. So I'll let Chris talk about that.
Yeah, well, so going to one of the things that SJ said is that there is kind of this faith element in DevRel strategies whereby if you do the right thing, then wins and success will come naturally because the way developers want to be interacted with is they want you to reduce the friction and be their stewards and be humans. And so I agree with that. I think the getting close to revenue in measuring based on metrics that are actually tied to revenue, I see as very much an internal kind of strategy, and I sense the fear around that. But yeah, that's the one that I've been throwing around metrics that I think have been challenging to kind of walk through and explain. And my premise there is basically, I think you're measured by revenue, whether you want to be or not. But
Sure.
yeah,
Especially
that's
now.
really the only one. Yeah, that's really the only place where we've kind of had a debate on whether we should pursue, because deciding metrics is a big deal for DevRel. I mean, getting that right is very important.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually like, without trying to segue too seamlessly, Common Room has been incredibly helpful for us to sort of start to kind of visualize and understand what those measurements actually can potentially be. I think one thing that we've struggled with even in February when I came back to HubSpot, and even in the year I was at HubSpot before, and I'm sure HubSpot won't mind me saying this, is that we kind of struggled with being able to do, really clear measurement of our developer activities and our developer community engagement. And so having a tool set, for me anyways, who is a very sort of an anxious metrics person and metrics averse, I'm much more driven
That is
by,
the bigger point.
yeah, I'm driven by developer stories much more than I am by, bottom line metrics, but I also understand we need those bottom line metrics. I feel like Common Room is this really nice sort of like place where both of those things sit, where you can find stories and you can also, extract the metrics that you need. So it's been really helpful for us to look at how we're going to be using it this year and come to a place of, agreement there.
Fair. Anything else to add, Chris?
No, I was just realizing. I think that I am a metrics fan. So metrics averse versus I love me
Yeah,
numbers
that's
and
that's the
graphs.
crux. Yeah, that's the crux of the difference, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's actually remarkable because I think that's what I'm more blown away, right? You have someone who is more oriented around these qualitative factors, although like you're talking about churn, you're talking about life cycle. I mean, that's still it's highly important things. And then you have
Yeah.
Chris, you're more metrics oriented. I would imagine that this is something that many community teams in many organizations deal with, this kind of tussle going back and forth there. I know you mentioned Common Room a bit, and I'd love to dive in there a bit more. But before we roll into that, I'm curious, like, is Common Room, not specifically, but is Common Room a way that you can find some degree of resolve or common ground with those two differing point of views?
I
Hmm.
think so. I think Common Room has unlocked the conversation of what's possible to measure, which makes it a lot easier to decide what we can measure, and what's going to be most important for us as the HubSpot developer community folks. And so, it goes from everything from, I've always had this, interest in understanding how we can measure more activity and increase sort of like engagement. That's a big buzzword that has lots of different definitions, but in the case of the HubSpot developer community, really at the end of the day, developers are answering each other's questions. There's a small percentage that are going to, become best buddies and like travel together and, maybe start businesses together. We love to see that happen, but truly the sort of bread and butter of our community activity is developers asking questions and other developers coming in and answering them. And so, there's things like there's the ability to measure that within Common Room. That's fantastic, but we can even adjust things within the Common Room that represent what we think is more important, because we have not had a problem in our developer communities with folks coming in and asking questions. However, we've often struggled with folks coming in and replying to those questions. And so when we're talking about things like features that Common Room has, like why am I drawing a complete blank? The points.
Oh, impact
Impact.
points. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Of
Yeah.
course, the only thing that I've been thinking about in the last few days, and then I go blank on it. When we look at impact points, we can actually customize the weighting of those, and for us, that's super, super important. So we're going to be using impact points heavily in our programming this year, and the fact that those existed within y'all's system and that we can influence the weighting of them really helped us like hone in on that as an opportunity to actually measure like which developers are now more active and how can we like sort of like inspire them to become more active and watch that activity grow over time. And so that's going to be the big focus of this year, which I'm not sure we would have done had we not known that it was possible to measure that.
Yeah, that it is a big deal. And when you talk about like how do we find a common ground, like literally SJ and I, as we've been having conversations about metrics and what matter, it's been interesting because there's so much you can do in Common Room, but part of the biggest value has been so far is to do the opposite and say, what are the things that we for sure will use every single day as a part of our flow with the tool? Because the problem is we just put it out there and say, do whatever you want with it, then it doesn't become like kind of a de facto standard. And a part of that was with the impact scores, looking at this really cool idea. It was like, well, let's create cohorts and let's see how the cohorts transition over time, because it's something that we were kind of always talking about, but never put into tactics. So the exercise of figuring out how we were strategically going to use Common Room helped us get our common ground and helped us solidify some of our plans. And that's super important. Because one thing I'll say that like the vast majority of DevRel folks out there are doing very poorly is communicating to the business and not having a strategy. And so this was something that was top priority for us.
Anything else to add, SJ? I have a couple
Yeah,
follow-up
just
questions.
thinking there's a difference between saying to the exec level, oh, we talked to X number of developers, or we got exposure to X number of developers through our blog posts, or whatever it may be. Between that and saying, oh, we actually increased the engagement with this core group of developers, and now we have more folks in this specific, kind of cohort that we're looking to activate. Something that I've actually never been able to do that in any meaningful capacity in any sort of prior role, not without like really, really heavy lifting in our analytics team. When Lord knows, as much as we love our analytics teams, they don't always have time for DevRel. They want to, but stretched thin.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that's not an uncommon experience. Let's be honest. There's only so many resources, and this is such well, it's interesting because it's been around for a while, rather. To Chris's point about this deep history of DevRel, but it's interesting because it seems to be like coming of its day. Like it's everyone's looking into community. How can we use it as a strategy? So it's interesting because I have many conversations with folks, and it seems like the resource constraint can be difficult. So it sounds like what y'all have done over at HubSpot is you're leveraging a tool like Common Room to help kind of alleviate some of that. You don't have the time for the analysts to come in and do this deep work, but you're trying to frame out something, right? Two questions is a follow-up for that. One, viewers who are watching this may not know exactly what impact points are. So I'm going to direct this to SJ. First of all, like, I know what impact points are, but what do they mean to you? And as far as the cohorts part of it, it almost sounds like a funnel, right? So I'm curious if you can add, and maybe it isn't by your definition, can you add a little bit more resolution there into what that might look like?
Yeah, sure. So when I think of impact points, I'm thinking of, I'll take an example. We have one developer in our community who has by far the most impact points of anyone. And he's constantly in our developer community forums, in our developer Slack, constantly answering questions. And so obviously we love that kind of activity. And that's the kind of things that are the impact points. There's points assigned to each, there's weighted points assigned to each sort of action that's taken within the community. Everything from answering a question, posting a question, a like react, an emoji interaction, I'm sure on Twitter, like retweets, all of that good stuff. So you can sort of pick and choose from the community defined spaces, anything from social media to your forums, to your developer Slack, even to your Discord, which we've also been experimenting with. And so there's just a ton of possibilities to be able to automate this measurement of activity and engagement. And to just put a finer point on it of what I was mentioning earlier, if you have specific needs within your community or ways that you define importance, you can actually go in to the Common Room weighting model for each of those points and tweak it to your needs. That being said, the weighted model that you get out of the box is actually great and fantastic and based on all kinds of industry standards. So there's, for most communities, I'm not sure there'd be much of a need for it. For us, there was some nuanced stuff that we wanted to tweak. So in terms of the actual cohorts and programming that we want to do, we have two big buckets right now of folks with their sort of point distribution. We have like the 1%, like the maybe 0.05% who have an exponential number of points. And they're doing that of their own free will. We love them. And they're fantastic folks. And we have the vast majority of folks who are coming in, maybe asking a question, churning, not coming back because they didn't get an answer, whatever reason it may be. We're kind of looking at that sweet spot in between and how we can move those folks to a slightly higher sweet spot. Because to me, there's an expectation, for folks coming into community, whether it be developer community, especially developer community, I will say, but for community in general, there's always going to be a small percentage of your folks that are hyper engaged. And you can't expect to get like huge swaths of the community to become hyper engaged. So we just want to see those subtle motions of folks moving up. We're adding more value to their experience, and in turn, they're giving more value back to the HubSpot community, which ends up turning into, better quality integrations, better quality customization of HubSpot, overall better experience for our customers. So it's a slow process, but being able to actually see the needle move on it is extremely helpful for us.
Amazing. Anything else to add, Chris?
Yeah, I'd say that when you ask the question, is it a funnel? I think the term funnel kind of scares me a little bit because then it's, DevRel can get lumped funnel with marketing like fairly quickly. We're HubSpot. We think in terms of flywheel. I think it applies to the community as well. And the other thing that is interesting just to highlight out that SJ said is like, we shouldn't think about making everybody that top 0.5%. There is this area where you're a professional developer who is committed to the platform. Like that's where we want to get you. And if we can move you there, then that's great. So those segments are powerful.
Curious, I know we're getting a little bit close to time here, but I'm curious, why do you feel it's so important, right, that you are vigilant about not necessarily driving everyone into that upper domain of community? Like, Chris, share a little bit more about
that.
Well,
I think there's two reasons. One, you'll if you optimize for your outliers, you're optimizing probably for the wrong thing. So it can get really dangerous to say, we want everybody to be XYZ community member. We might optimize for the incorrect thing and not support the masses, which is shooting ourselves in the foot. Besides just maybe being an unrealistic expectation to give to the organization, but also they're not just outliers in our community. Like, this type of personality is an outlier in every community. So it's not reasonable to say that our typical developer is going to be there. I guess that's the same way of saying the same thing. So it has to be very intentional. Everybody's probably worked in an organization where you find the biggest number and you report on that number. But if it doesn't add value to the organization or help the company grow better, I'm going to get every HubSpot tagline in there, then you shouldn't be doing it.
There's also a couple of things that we haven't discussed. Our product team relies on our community pretty heavily for feedback, obviously. And I think, just to add to Chris's point, if we're constantly getting feedback from the same sort of 0.1%, like, that's maybe directionally wrong and it's not reflecting our customer needs. And then to sort of extend on that, it's so important for us to have a broad and diverse community from every aspect, from demographic, skill level. And that's just going to make, like I said, make the product better for our customers at the end of the day. And so if we're able to identify folks who are kind of at different levels of activation, we have a higher odds of, attracting and activating all kinds of, different kinds of folks. There are a lot of use cases for developers too on HubSpot, and trying to optimize for all of those is a challenge. But by trying to identify more activity from kind of newer folks, we're able to see what resonates more and kind of what's going to have the most impact.
Amazing. No, this has been such a great conversation. I wish I could, honestly, I would stay another 30 minutes with both of y'all, but I want to make sure I'm respecting your time. I do have one.
Bring us back.
I sure will. No doubt about that. I have one last quick, I'll do one rapid fire question. I'm stealing this from Brené Brown only because she's amazing. Or the concept. The future of community is, Chris.
Oh, geez, you're really going to make me go first? Actually, this came up yesterday, and I think that we're going to strike a better balance between the platform being the center of the community to I think we're going to have communities where if you want to be broad, you can be broad when you want to be broad. If you want to be specific, you can be specific when you want to be specific, but you are not accountable for always being there. Because, for example, Twitter, if you don't show up long enough, you've vanished, which I kind of did in the last month. Or other platforms where you're more committed to the tool than you are to the conversations happening in the tool. I think we're going to get a much healthier relationship. And I think that we're going to be even more content centric and less about the tool itself, if that makes sense. I know that's a bit philosophical.
I would extend on that. I agree with kind of where you're going with that. To me, the future is kind of enabling these kind of micro audiences to connect with each other and become a community. Because there's like I said, there are all kinds of different developer use cases for HubSpot, and we can't possibly create community spaces for all of them. But we have folks that are, identifying some of the folks that are engaged in all those different areas and giving them the inspiration and the support to create their own kind of micro spaces and micro communities. That's what I'm sort of investing in and imagining our future is going to be with HubSpot.
Wonderful. This has been great. Honestly, I definitely took a tangent from my original plan here, but I'm glad that I did. And yes, thank you both for joining me today. Folks, coming up in a few minutes, we'll have a demo of our new segments feature that also HubSpot has been working on pretty deeply with us. Any last remarks from either of you before we close?
No,
I was just going to say, if SJ and I didn't make you go on a tangent, we did something wrong. That's all we know how to do.
Yeah, true. It was a bit of a risk having us both on, for that matter, but
I'm glad I did.
We made it work. Just thank you so much, Common Room, for bringing us on and for having awesome tooling and getting the conversation going forward and, being industry leaders. It's really helpful.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everyone. What did y'all think? I had a blast when I was chatting with SJ and Chris, and honestly, I'm just so excited to chat even more in the live Q&A later. I do want to say, I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat. We do get a few great ones. So folks, like, you've got these two professionals here. Definitely take advantage. Ask whatever you want. We'll get right into that Q&A right after this demo coming up on segments. So again, drop your questions in the chat. Jacqueline will be there. She'll fire them off to us when we start the Q&A. So first and foremost, what are segments, right? To really understand what segments are, we first need to understand how members work in Common Room. Like, members are added to your Common Room when they're active in any of your connected community sources like Slack, Discord, Twitter, Meetup, for example. Once they're added, though, members are aggregated into a big list that we call the Member Explorer. And that's pretty much what you're seeing right here. And again, this is great, but I'm not sure if you noticed, this is a big list of people. We've got 12,673 people on this list. So in order to help you drill this down, Common Room does offer a ton of filters. I mean, a lot of filtering capability. But let's just say, for example, we wanted to see members who are the most influential, and they're also contributors in our community. And then we also want to filter them by impact points. So we'll do 350 in this instant. And essentially what impact points are a built-in contribution, like community contribution scoring system into Common Room. So as people like post, they react, attend events, they get a certain score for each of those actions that they take in your community. And of course, the more that they do, the more impactful they are. And then again, the higher their impact score would be. So one more thing here, we also want to filter this for all time because we want to make sure that we're accruing all the points that these folks have gotten since they've been in the community. And now you can see right here in the top left corner, we've basically taken that massive list and we've reduced it to just 36 members, again, that are highly influential, big contributors, and have a high degree of impact points. Now, this is where segments actually come into play. So we can go ahead and do right here on the screen is actually select all the members in this segment, all 36, or in this list. And what we're going to do is actually pull them from the big list and put them into a smaller, more concise list that we call, you might have guessed it, segments. So let's click here, add to segment. And since we're creating a new segment, we have to give it a name. So we'll just call it webinar test for now. Hit create. And that will be actually brought to the segment itself. Just going to take a little bit thinking. Cool. No, not yet. Bueller. Okay, cool. So now we're in our webinar test segment, right? And you can do a few different things here right off the bat. You're able to see, for example, activity from all these members across all the different sources. And again, we can still use all of this rich filtering that I showed you before that Common Room has. We can also do things that are really cool, like take some actions. So we can actually, for example, in an instant, go ahead, select all these members, and then actually send a Slack message, direct message to all of them individually. So maybe we want to invite them somewhere to some kind of an event. Maybe we want to just thank them for their work or their contribution, you name it. So we've got a couple quick tools like that. But another powerful thing that we can do within segments is actually add statuses to people in segments. And we can use this for something, for example, like an onboarding workflow for a champions program, for example. So just to quickly show you how we can do that, you can see right here, statuses. We can add a status, and I've already got a couple of them planned out here. Excuse my on-stage typing, but we'll do reached out, awaiting response. Then we'll do not interested. And then we'll do accepted, right? And then we'll save all of these. And now you can see all of these right here. All these statuses have been added. And what we can do with these is actually add them to different members in this group. So for example, we're talking about our onboarding flow for our champions program. We can say, okay, well, we reached out to Max and Piper. We already reached out and they said, rather, we're waiting for their response. And then Nikki, for example, said, hey, not interested. Andy accepted. So pretty straightforward step there. Now, this is just obviously one example of what you could do. But of course, we've had customers who built like a bunch of different examples with segments, like for example, discovering and tracking community content creators or potential forum moderators, tracking and looking for new conference speakers, beta testers. Really, the options are pretty much endless for tracking any of your programs. But as you've seen, this is actually pretty easy. I think y'all would agree. But what if I told you we've just made it actually even easier with our latest member management feature update that we've done to this? You can see right here, member management, as well as here. We've actually added the ability to automatically add and remove members for a segment. You can also actually automatically update these statuses as well. So let's take a quick look at just auto adding members real quick. So we'll go right here to member management. We'll hit configure. We'll click auto add. And then all we have to do now is actually just add the same filters that we added before. So influencers, whoops, close that are also contributors. And this one, we're just also going to want to make sure that we nick off team. So we want to make sure we're excluding our team so they don't show up in this list. And then what we're also going to do is add our impact points back. Nice and easy. It looks like 32 more members plus the 4 here. So we're back at our 36 members. But now essentially, once we save this, these members are just going to get added automatically. So all that effort that we put in at the beginning of this, it's all automated now, which is really great. But that's it for this. But there's actually one more example I want to show you, which can be really powerful. And remember how I showed you earlier, I told you you could automate, update the statuses within the segment automatically. Well, I want to show you a little bit more of an advanced version of that can actually be used to track emerging champions through different program tiers as they increase their community impact. So let me take a quick second. I'll switch tabs. And also, just, I do have to move relatively quick through this demo so we could do our have our Q&A. So please drop any questions in the chat. Again, Jack will fire those off to us. So now we're in our other tab here. We're in our champions tiers. I've already pre-built this. And as you can see, we have our statuses set up, but we can see these members are actually distributed across each of these, right? And what we have here is actually different tiers, which represents a different milestone in the journey to becoming a community champion ultimately. So let's quickly look at how this one is configured. And honestly, it's pretty easy as well. So on this first one, we'll look at auto add. So this is how we bring members into the actual segment in the first place. And we're setting this to impact points to be greater than or equal to 50, right? So we just want to set some kind of a threshold for folks that brings them in here. Now, if we go back to member management, we'll check out our tier 1 status. And we also have this for greater than or equal to 50. And that's so when folks get dropped into this particular segment, they'll immediately be attributed with the tier 1 entry status. Now we can start to see how the journey will come to play. So tier 2 up and coming, these are going to be folks that have greater than or equal to 100 impact points. So they're active in our community, but they're not quite getting at champion level, but they are increasing their, their impact. Then we have tier 3, which is on the cusp. So we've actually tripled the last one. So we're at greater than or equal to 300 impact points. So again, lots of community activity, but not quite to our champion level yet. And then finally at tier 4, we have our champions, which this is a dramatically larger number. We have greater than or equal to 1,000 impact points, but that's so we can really be able to identify like some of the most impactful people that we might want to bring into this program. Now, going back to members, I just want to quickly recap. So advanced segment champion journey, we have multiple tiers, which essentially represent different milestones in the journey. We've basically taken our automations and we've created impact point thresholds for each of these. One for people to come into the actual journey, one for different tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, so we can move them through the journey. And then now we can actually see this all unfold, which is amazing. But again, I know I have to be quick. That's segments in Common Room. Let me know what y'all think. And just so you do know, this beta version of segments is actually out now. So if you want to go and get started, you can head over to our website and sign up for free today. And also let us know how you might use segments in your community in the chat. We're actually really interested. I mean, this is, again, a beta that we've built but we really want to see what other things, like use your imagination. How can you use this to track new members and community members through their journeys to come closer to your organization? But again, that's segments in Common Room. Thank you so much. So now the time has come after that quick demo for the Q&A with SJ and Chris. Miguel, can you bring them on for us?
Ta-da!
Hey everyone, how you doing?
Hey everyone. We're good. It's been fun to see all the chat going on, and watching us back have that conversation has also got my brain spinning about a lot more thoughts. So good times.
Awesome. Chris, I know I've been chatting with you through text for the entire time here. I did not know you were wearing a brilliantly bright orange jacket. I love it.
Yeah, no, that was a surprise that I didn't want to let loose too quickly.
Fair enough. All right, so let's quickly jump into some of the questions that we have in the chat. And again, we only have a few. So folks, I know we've got about 18 folks left there. Like, definitely take this opportunity. I mean, SJ, Chris, they have so much depth of experience. You've heard it in the conversation.
We're really wizards.
They're wizards, exactly. Let's start with our first question here, right? For new community, this is from Gabe and the audience here. For a new community where a community leader is wearing multiple hats, so social media, content management, et cetera, what advice would you have for that person? Either one of you, which would like to take it.
I can jump into this one.
Yeah, that's all you.
I think that this is such a common challenge as we still try to navigate as an industry what we actually mean when we say community. So it depends. What are the expectations for folks in your work of community? Are they imagining it's social media and content? Is it all of those things? Are you defining what community is? I think taking a step back and not overwhelming yourself with all of the things that you feel like you probably should be doing, and look at like what you're really trying to do for the business, and creating some sort of a solid North Star. Either if it's a mission statement. For me, I constantly remind myself, my job is to ensure developers connect with each other. And if the work I'm doing doesn't impact that, then I'm probably going to kind of put that on the back burner. So sometimes things like social media feel like, oh, we have to have a Twitter account. Oh, we need to be present on X social media platform. But do you really? Like, is that going to push the needle for your specific vision? And so giving yourself the grace of, reminding the company that you're one person, you can have a lot of impact as long as you stay focused, can help kind of navigate which of these, overwhelming amounts of potential channels you can build community in. So I know that's kind of a vague response, but I would just say take a step back and make sure you're not overwhelming yourself with the possibilities, and thinking about what you're trying to do and what's going to get you there.
Yeah, I would just add, like, on top of that and echoing all of that, I think this is something that I've had to remind a lot of people who are beginning their careers in DevRel. And I said in the talk that it's like DevRel historically has not been great at communicating to the business. And part of this is pushing back. Like, sometimes what you're told to do does not make sense. And it's in your interest, in the company's interest, to push back on that. And the best way to mitigate that is you come up with the plan and you would let people tell you no, versus you being fed responsibilities and you needing to go back and say no. I know that's easier said than done. I know that can be really uncomfortable, but if you're in an organization that doesn't take that sort of prioritization seriously, it's a big risk, and it's a risk for everybody anyways.
Yeah. Actually, I love both of those answers, right? Because I think as a community, just like even in my experience in community, it's like you have to be so dynamic, and it feels like there's just a never ending list of things to do. So it really comes down to like prioritization. I know, Chris, you've mentioned this as well. Like, how do we actually, tap into the needs of the business and align some of our initiatives with that? I think some community folks may sometimes feel like we might be compromising when we're giving back to the business, whether it's like, hey, we're helping sales or driving some leads or something out of community. I definitely have been there and felt that way. But again, it is about like, how can we be dynamic? How can we create a relationship with the business that's healthy in a way that we can sustain it, but also sustain a vibrant community of folks that are supporting and caring for each other, right? Because we're all trying to get either to a new level of success or learn a tool. And I think that's what's so powerful. Thank you both for that. We actually have another question here from Sarah, and this is another good one here. Sarah would love to hear both of your thoughts on where a DevRel team should be building their community, where they should be directing their people to, right? And who are the key stakeholders, in your opinion, for maintaining that momentum of that community?
Do you want to start with that one, Chris? There's lots of
Yeah, I
questions
think
in there.
I think that's an hour-long webinar in its
Yeah,
own right.
that's
So
a big
I'm
one.
gonna stay fairly high level. First of all, I'll say that not all communities are equal. Tech for tech, for example, is when you are a tech company selling to techies, has a different flavor of community than platform type communities like HubSpot, which both of those are very different from open source communities, which is like, it's just whole different flavor. And you have to be very careful there with how you approach your strategy and building and engaging. And so I think it's important to be aware of that. My best recommendation, because it is a big question, I'd be happy to continue this conversation. And I think SJ will have a lot more to offer there than I will. But my best recommendation is to forget about the community for a second and talk about what outcome you're trying to achieve. SJ mentioned the North Star, and then work backwards. So if you think about when we do it right, what does it look like? What is your expectation? Because there's an expectation in there somewhere. If there isn't, that's a problem because it will surprise you. And then work backwards, and it should paint a picture of like where you expect to get with your community and help you build a strategy around it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's helpful to think about that concept of getting that end goal in mind and kind of reverse engineering to where you want to be. I would also say this question, it sounds to me like the way the question is worded that you're just getting started and perhaps there is no formal community space today. If that's the case, if I'm assuming that correctly, I think one of the things you can do is, you don't even need a formal community space. Like I would say avoid any big, huge one-to-many spaces until you absolutely are overwhelmed with the amount of people that want to connect with each other and with the company. So things like Slack, things like forums, those should not be entertained as ideas until the amount of people that are kind of knocking at your door are overwhelming for one person. I think there are smaller things you can do. Like some of the most successful developer communities I've ever worked with were just Google groups where it was just like, we were emailing each other back and forth, old school style, kind of like bulletin board style. And starting with the folks that, identifying those folks early on who are kind of your beta customers, folks who are asking a lot of questions, getting a lot of adoption out of the products and tools or whatever company service you're offering. And you can roll out kind of a mini ambassador program for those early adopters. And hopefully a certain percentage of those will graduate into being kind of your key stakeholders or your key initial kind of community champions. And then they'll sort of like, you have to really, it's so hard. If you don't quite get that right at the beginning, you can really set the tone for your community in the wrong direction. So and I would also say getting all the stuff for what seems like the bigger community plays, things like codes of conduct, things like, the rules of the road for your community. It may seem not necessary if you're dealing with a really small amount of folks, but you really want to set the standard with that stuff from the beginning so that you're nurturing the kind of community culture that you want to build over time that's inclusive, welcoming, psychologically safe, and ultimately more productive as it grows. So I guess those are the two things I would say. Start small, don't feel any pressure to like cast a huge wide net at the beginning, but get those core inclusion community tools as a part of the kind of DNA of your community from the beginning.
I love that. Honestly, I love both of those points. And to your last point, SJ, mentioning like even getting some of the structure, right? The code of conduct, even when there's only a few people in the community is just so key. Cause I just remember, back in my experience at Webflow, just having these times where actually as the community starts to grow rapidly, you start to almost deal with, like these emerging personalities that are also influential in the community, right?
Yeah,
And of
absolutely.
course, you want that in a lot of ways, right? You want the positive side of that, but sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way, right? And you have people who are, kind of standing antithetical to the values that maybe are implicit, but not explicit. So I think that's why your last point is very
Don't be afraid to kick people out, even if they're really active. Like, I think that's
there.
important. It's a tough skill to manage, but yeah.
Exactly. That's awesome. We have two more questions. So I know I want to stay on track here with time. So this one was actually from an anonymous attendee. But what are some of the best practices on how to run a community, but with different user types?
User types.
I can try a quick version, and then maybe Chris, you can jump in. We deal with this at HubSpot. I think I mentioned in the conversation that we have multiple. I mean, if you look at the broad HubSpot community, not even just the developer community, there are so many motivations and slices of types of people that come into HubSpot to get done what they need to get done. It's not just marketers and it's not just developers, like these two very obvious audiences. They're all kind of coming in with very, very different perspectives. They could be building a website on the CMS. They could be customizing our CRM. They could be using HubSpot for marketing, using it for sales. Like, there's just a lot of different users that are active in our community. I think this sounds really obvious, but like, understanding as your community evolves, that the sort of like, you're sort of always evolving your channels and boards, so they make the most sense for the most motivations, I guess. So if you look at our developer Slack, we have it broken down largely by product bucket, because realistically, most of the conversations that are happening are product driven. And we have some spaces for, more networking and like generalized conversation, but the actual channels are really broken down by product features. And if you look at, our broader community, Rekoros, for example, that HubSpot uses for all of our customers, that's broken down by different things. There's some language specific forums. There's forums based on like tips and tricks for marketers. So really getting a sense of what those are and being quick to like kind of pivot and poll your audience to make sure those spaces like reflect the ongoing needs. Like, we just did a really big, not really big, but like we did a little overhaul of our channels this year, and it made a big difference with the amount of kind of activity and engagement we were getting in our developer Slack. So that would be like, that's sort of my I thought it would be a short answer, but my answer. Chris, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess what I'd add to that, because I think I hope I'm reading this right, and what is meant as personas. And yeah, like, you can have communities with a wide range of personas, but sometimes those personas are on a spectrum of like education level and upskilling and so forth. And in that case, it makes sense that they can be in the same space. A lot of this is going to be tool dependent. So depending on the tool that you're using for the space, if they are not even like no overlap, like completely different personas, I do think it's important to create clear boundaries. I am not for tool sprawl at all, but those clear boundaries, and this is like a interesting use case for Common Room, actually. Those clear boundaries can cause problems with metrics and reporting internally and like evaluating, and there can be a conflict of interest in strategies for the two different groups. Like, one group is successful when they do X, the other group is successful when they do Y. So there may be a point, if they're not on a continuum, where you need to like completely separate them. And I mentioned open source earlier. That's a scenario where they may be the exact same persona, but you still need to completely separate them. The ones that you're trying to upgrade to your commercial product versus those who are in the open source community, who you just need to like leave them alone. You're a steward, and that's it. So it is an important thing to think about. And I think by asking the question, you're already thinking about it.
Awesome.
Rock always says, know your role. It always applies. I use that
Perfect.
quote all the time. Know your role, like know their roles, know our community roles. Thank you,
Well,
Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
I'm going to keep that in mind. Oh, well, I love the Rock Edit on the Instagram account, the whole deal. But yeah, that's
Nice.
pretty funny. Yeah. I'm getting asked to wrap things up by Jack on the back end, but I'm going to defy her a little bit. And I'm going to ask this one last question because I know it will be really quick. But from another anonymous attendee, where does one get a HubSpot orange blazer like that?
Ah.
Well, I will never tell. Actually, I will. It's Amazon. Believe it or not.
It's
I have a pink
one of these
too.
days, maybe it will be a perk from our community, but Chris has just gone to get his pink one.
See?
Well, he's
Ooh.
ready. Well, I don't know what company has a pink logo, but watch out.
I have a collection. It's my thing.
That's awesome. That would be a cool perk, actually, of the community, right? You get the orange jacket award. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I've been thinking about that.
I think that would be brilliant. Jacqueline's sending me angry faces now to keep rolling. So I want to keep this last little bit very quick. Any final quick thoughts from either of you, Chris, SJ?
Yeah,
go ahead, Chris.
So I would just say, I love talking about this stuff. So if anybody wants to reach out and on LinkedIn and continue the conversation, please do. I've especially those who are just kind of entering the field. It is important for me that our industry understands the background of where this all came from, because I see a lot of mistakes happening where we're making assumptions like DevRel is new. No, it's like it's a strategic jump from what we've been doing for quite a while. So if you want to chat, let's chat.
Yeah. On the flip side, I would say it's not surprising that many companies still are having us just need to justify ourselves. I think I said this in the webinar that our current lead says that DevRel and community today is sort of like product was 10 years ago. So we're on this like education path in the tech world where folks are really starting to understand our value, and hopefully we'll get there, but don't feel bad if there's still scrutiny. That's what tools like Common Room are for, to help you justify and showcase the value of the work you do.
Awesome.
And yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and all of those places. I'm happy to chat whenever.
Sweet. I'm pretty sure Jacqueline should be dropping the links if you haven't already seen them in the chat.
She did. Thank you, Jacqueline. And thank you so much, Jacqueline, by the way, behind the scenes powerhouse.
Yes, thank you
for making this happen.
Yes, thank you so much, Jacqueline, even if you're angry with me right now. But again, I really enjoyed speaking with the both of you, and also enjoyed spending time with all y'all watching. Again, thanks again, and goodbye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, everyone. Bye.